Coming up, I'll be speaking with Paul Maccabee, author of John Dillinger Slept Here. That's next on the St. Paul Forum. Welcome to the St. Paul Forum. I'm John Forde. Along with Lisa Tabor, I'll be guest hosting during 2011 while regular host Mike Wassenaar is on sabbatical. With me today is Paul Maccabee, author of John Dillinger Slept Here. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much, John.
This is one of the most interesting history books in the history of St. Paul.
You like gangsters.
I love gangsters. There's going to be so much fun in this. Before we get to that, tell me a little bit about your bio. Where did you wake up into consciousness, and how did you arrive in our fair city?
Absolutely. I started in Boston, fell in love with a beautiful Minnesota woman, former St. Paul Council member Paul Maccabee, became a journalist, an investigative reporter, and one day in the offices of the Twin Cities Reader, someone ran in and said, "The Godfather is dead. The Godfather of Minneapolis, Kid Can, is dead." And I thought, there was a Godfather in Minnesota? And I always thought Minnesota was Garrison Keillor, James J. Hill, but no, for about 40 years, the most powerful man in Minneapolis was not Hubert Humphrey, was not any of the other captains of industry, but was a Romanian immigrant, a crook, a blackmailer, an extortionist, and a killer named Kid Can. And I thought, oh, this is so much more interesting than J.J. Hill. And I started researching a book on the gangsters of Minnesota.
And it just took off like wildfire from there.
Well, I didn't know that John Dillinger lived in St. Paul for a year and a half, that Babyface Nelson, that Ma Barker, all the people who have nicknames. I figure you couldn't make it as a gangster in the 1930s unless you have a name like Babyface, because Babyface Nelson's original name that he was born with was Lester Gillis, which is not the kind of name that strikes fear in your heart. You know, you rob a bank and you go, "Stick him up, I'm Lester," you know. And he insisted to the Dillinger gang that they call him, Lester Gillis, Big George. But the Dillinger gang said, "Give us a break. You got babyface cheeks, you're Babyface Nelson. And if you called Babyface Nelson Babyface to his face, he would kill you."
So this really take off with the advent of Prohibition, or was there a gangster element prior to that, sort of a residual of World War I?
Turn of the century, there was a police chief named John J. O'Connor, who was nicknamed the Big Fellow. He's about 6'3", very imposing. And he decided on a unique method of crime control for the city of St. Paul. It was called the O'Connor Agreement, after his name, or the Layover Agreement. The deal was, if you're a bank robber, John Forde, notorious kidnapper, bank robber, you come to the Twin Cities, you have to promise not to kill or rob anyone within the city limits of St. Paul. You can go to Minneapolis and kill whoever you want to. You can go to Des Moines, to Wisconsin, kidnap people, but when you came to St. Paul, you had to be on your best behavior. Well, as a result of that, virtually every major bank robber, assassin, and kidnap guy in America came to St. Paul. And it wasn't unusual to walk down University Avenue in St. Paul, right by where University and Lexington cross. It was a beautiful restaurant called the Boulevards of Paris. So you'd be eating your steak there, and there would be public enemy number one, John Dillinger, the most wanted man in America, 10 feet from you with his girlfriend, Billy Frechette, and to your right over here is Babyface Nelson. But you knew that you were safe because the fix was in between the crooks like John Dillinger and Babyface and the good cops of St. Paul. So apparently it was like seeing a celebrity, maybe like seeing O.J. Simpson, kind of a dark celebrity. And all these bank robbers were all over St. Paul. And the weird thing is, I thought that the good people of St. Paul couldn't have known that their cops had struck a deal with organized crime all over America. But what I discovered is in the official St. Paul Police yearbook, they described the deal they had with the crooks. And they said, and I quote, "As a result of our understanding with the criminal element, never before in our history have the streets of St. Paul been so safe," and I love this last part, "or the virtue of our women so assured." I love that. Police were looking out for the virtue of our women.
That's right. Now, the reciprocity of this deal was then that when the feds telegraphed here and said, "Have you seen these guys?" They went, "We ain't seen nothing."
Wanted posters pulled down.
Yeah.
There was no extradition. If you were a crook in the city limits of St. Paul and you kept your nose clean, you were totally safe. And you ask about Prohibition. Prohibition was big in the Twin Cities, but in St. Paul in particular for a couple of reasons. Beer needed clean, really good quality water. You have the Mississippi River. You needed good Germans who knew how to brew beer. And even though it was illegal, you had the breweries, which according to the FBI files, the breweries, the ham breweries and others, would do near beer, which was legal beer or root beer, out the front door, but out the back door, you could still get bootleg whiskey from the breweries. So the fact that we had a vigorous brewery industry in St. Paul meant when Prohibition occurred, and of course it was written, the Prohibition Act, by a Minnesotan, Andrew Volstead, in Landmark Center in St. Paul. So weirdly, Minnesota was the birthplace of Prohibition and the city in America where Prohibition led to the most crime, because all of the police that took the bribes from the bootleggers, when Prohibition was repealed, they were still crooked cops. And the crooks who used to make their money from bootleg whiskey, now it was legal, where are they going to make? Kidnapping, bank robbery. The bad guys simply switched their crimes to the outlaw crimes of the 1930s.
And they couldn't legalize it all. That probably wouldn't work.
Couldn't legalize bank robbery, no. And what's so interesting about St. Paul is the underworld and the overworld in St. Paul were completely intertwined. The best place to describe that is the notorious nightclub on the Mississippi River Bluffs, right by the, excuse the expression, the Forde plant out by Ford Parkway in Highland. It was a gorgeous nightclub, very elegant food, steak, and you had the gangsters. John Dillinger said that the Hollyhocks Club in St. Paul had the best steak that he ever ate. But the club couldn't have survived without your parents and my parents going there for kind of a wicked night out. So 3/4 of the people in that underworld nightclub were the good people of St. Paul. 1/4 were members of Dillinger's gang. The underworld and the overworld met in St. Paul.
Now, when the gangsters came to town, did they have to, in addition to behaving, did they have to like check in? I'm in town, I want to...
Do you know where we are right now? We're in Lower Town in downtown St. Paul. 2 blocks from here is the magnificent railroad depot. When the crooks would arrive on the railroad train, they would walk out of the train, they would see the officer, Tom Brown, or one of the other crooked St. Paul police officers. Al Capone, who came here to town and stayed in St. Paul, would go, "Great to see you, Tom." The bad guy, the bank robber, would have to explain where he was staying. I'm staying on Summit Avenue. If he had a girlfriend, that would be fine. If he didn't have a girlfriend, the police would arrange for female companionship. If they needed some weapons, the best machine guns in America were sold on Wabasha Avenue, flown in from Texas. Basically, St. Paul was a vacation spot and a Walmart for anything that a bank robber needed. Women, machine guns, and protection. It was all here. But you're right. They had to tell the police who they were and where they were staying and what they needed.
Now, how did the feds look the other way? I mean, they must have known something.
The feds hated this.
Okay, but why didn't they set up a way station at the train coming in and out of... I mean, I thought the gangsters came in and out by car. If they're coming in and out by train, it seems that's kind of a bottleneck. The feds could jump on it.
But the police betrayed the FBI.
Oh.
I read in the book, you'll see the FBI files. And J. Edgar Hoover went nuts because he came that close to arresting the Barker Karpus gang, which was Ma Barker, who everybody remembers from the movies, and her boys, the Barker boys, and Alvin Creepy Karpus. You can't make it without a nickname like Creepy. The police on South Robert Street came within 2 minutes of arresting Alvin Creepy Karpus and the rest of the Barker Karpus gang, but I'm sorry, the FBI were that close, but the police got a tip-off and called Ma Barker and said, get your boys out of South Robert Street, out of your house. And when the FBI arrived, the food was still hot on their plates. And over again, the St. Paul police thwarted the efforts of the FBI to capture the gangsters.